Oh, good afternoon. Sorry, got caught off guard. Yes, today is September the 28th. It is Monday. You hopefully took that test um, over the weekend. And we are approaching the end of this unit on Reformation Wars, which is a short unit, but at the same time, um, AP Euro goes at a pretty fast clip. Uh, lots of testing, um, which even though it's more hassle for me and probably more stress for you, I would rather have lots of smaller tests as a way of because you can always make up your grade rather than what they do in a lot of colleges. As you know, in a lot of universities, college and university history courses, they might have your entire grade based on a midterm and a final, or a paper and a final, or something like that. We have a lot of tests. We have a lot of learning to do. So let's talk then about finishing this chapter, shall we? All right, so here we are here, part F, I do believe. Yeah. Elizabeth also executed her own cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots. Remember, Mary, Queen of Scots was a geese when she left France. Of course, I mean, she was very gifted, very intelligent, and I'm talking about Mary, Queen of Scots, Mary Geese. She left, she spoke, of course, not only French, but also Latin, and of course, had to learn English. Mary was French and Catholic, spent most of her life in Catholic France. Mary's husband, one of the Stuarts, had been murdered, and it was suspected that she was the mastermind and her lover the murderer. Yeah, I don't think that plots like that are anything new, particularly. Yes, this scandal forced her to abdicate and to give her throne to her 1-year-old son, who will become James the Sixth of Scotland, and test question, and later on he'll become James the First of England, the first of the Stuart Dynasty. Elizabeth the First will be the last of the Tudor Dynasty. Come on, Tudor Dynasty. Henry the Seventh, Henry the Eighth. I guess you could say Lady Jane Grey, who served for like 22 days. And then Mary the First, Bloody Mary, she was also called, and then Elizabeth, and those are the Tudors. Yes, and that takes us into the Stuart Dynasty, which is the subject matter of the next unit. But yes, Tudors, Stuarts, and then the Hanovers, but that's another story. All right, so of course, where was I at? Yes, Mary was found to be in association with two plots against her cousin Elizabeth, and was executed. Because of the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, of the last possibility of a peaceful return to Catholicism in England, Pope, I love these names, Sixtus V, began to publicly support a Spanish conquest of England. And remember, Philip II, who is the King of Spain, is not a politic. When the Pope tells him to do something, he, being a loyal Catholic, is fairly inclined to follow it. And he won't be the last king that does that. For example, Louis XIV of France is a king who followed the edicts of the Roman Catholic Church as much as he could. But anyway, let's get back to this, shall we? And so when Mary, Queen of Scots, was executed, she had been a Catholic. The Catholic Church had hoped that she would accede to the throne of England, and therefore England would become Catholic again, but didn't happen. And so Pope Sixtus V began to say, yeah, it's time that we got rid of this heretic Elizabeth I. And so thus begins the planning stages for the Spanish Armada. One of the most, and it was one of the most important sea battles of history, was the defeat of the Spanish Armada. And also, not only was it one of the most important sea battles in history, it shares a coincidence with two other sea invasions. And that is this. There have been three times in history where invasions, ocean invasions, maritime invasions, have been thwarted by acts of nature. Storms, yes. The first one was in do not write this down. I'm just, showing off. First was in 472 BC when the Persians under Xerxes, and if you watch that film, The 300, which I do not advise, it's like one long cartoon. And it takes great liberties with the story. But anyway, in 472 BC, a Persian invasion fleet headed for Greece across the Aegean was swallowed up in a great Aegean Sea storm, sank most of them. And the second time was in I want to say the 12th century AD. I can't remember the year, maybe the 13th century, when the Mongols, yes, the Mongols under Genghis Khan, Kublai Khan, Shaka Khan, no, I'm just kidding. Kublai Khan, yes, launched an invasion fleet across the Sea of Japan from Asia to Japan for the purpose of conquering the Japanese islands. And, Kublai Khan and the Mongols had the firepower. They had the horses, they had the numbers, and most historians, including the Japanese, agreed that had that invasion fleet successfully crossed the Sea of Japan, that Japanese would have been conquered by the Mongols. And in the middle of the ships crossing the Sea of Japan, a great storm rose up. And it pretty much destroyed the entire Mongol fleet, and the remnants of which were left were washed up on the shores of Japan and quickly and easily dispatched. The Japanese, ever being poetic, called that invasion the Divine Wind. Kind of like the sensation one gets from after visiting White Castles, right? But Divine Wind, get it? Anyway, yeah, I miss you guys. I need an audience. But anyway, yes. Oh, yes, the Japanese word for divine wind. Do you know, Mr. Fuller? I bet Mr. Arlinghouse knows. The Japanese word for divine wind, kamikaze. Yeah, but you said, but wait a minute, Mr. Harden. I thought kamikazes were the pilots in World War II. Well, yes, only they, in fact, the Japanese commander was a guy named Admiral Onishi, who came up with the idea for Japanese pilots, and to a lesser extent, soldiers, and to a lesser extent, other types of devices, would simply sacrifice their lives by flying a plane directly into an American ship. And they were called the kamikaze, the divine wind, which is something we might hopefully get a chance to talk about later, but no. Yeah, and so, yeah, that's the second one. The third one, though, is here, the defeat of the Spanish Armada. Philip II had the money, had the backing, and he was going to pick up somewhere in the neighborhood of an additional 10,000 Spanish soldiers waiting in the Netherlands who were going to go to England. And had they landed in England, they would have taken England. And remember, Elizabeth inherited a country that was bankrupt. She inherited a country, half of whom wanted to kill her. And she had all sorts of problems. Had the Spanish landed, history would have been very much different. But anyway, what happened was that, as we're going to find out, as the fleet headed northward from Spain to the English Channel, yes, they were met by the British Navy. It really wasn't a navy as much as a ragtag accumulation of ships, many of them privateers. The British ships were smaller, but being smaller, they could maneuver a lot better. Most of the Spanish ships were loaded down with soldiers and horses, as you saw in the film clip, and were not as maneuverable. And the British ships could slip in and out of the line of Spanish ships, do their damage and run. The British had the wind, what they call the gauge. They had the wind at their backs, which is very important in a sailing confrontation. And then when the Spanish fleet slipped past the English Channel and headed up into the North Sea, we need a map here, the North Sea surrounding Britain, that's when the Spanish fleet was hit by this massive North Sea storm. So many of the ships were wrecked and ended up in, of all places, Scotland. The ships, or pieces of the ships. And you had Spanish soldiers washing up on shores, and the Scottish citizens were more than happy to jump them, strip them of whatever possessions they might have. And what was left of the Spanish Armada had to make the entire route around England and limp back to Spain. Point of the matter was it broke Spanish sea power in 1588. So, yes. One of the most important sea battles of history was the defeat of the Spanish Armada. Francis Drake, when it says singed the king's beard, he actually launched a nighttime attack in the Spanish port city of Cadiz. What he did was actually what was shown in the film, only it was done to ships in a port. Francis Drake hauled a bunch of very old ships to Cadiz, loaded down with hay and fuel oil and things of that nature, and lit them up, and then pushed them into the harbor. Spanish ships were at anchor. They ran into each other. It was mass confusion. Yeah. The Armada was a fleet of 131 ships and 25,000 sailors and soldiers bound for England. The smaller and swifter English ships ran through and around the Spanish fleet, inflicted them with heavy losses, and 1/3 of the fleet never made it back to Spain. Spain never fully recovered. And by never, I mean never to this day. After this, Spain will quickly descend into the position of an also ran as far as European power is concerned. It was overtaken by England in the race for the sea and by France as the dominant land power in Europe. All right, let's shift gears and talk about the 30 Years' War. Why is it called the 30 Years' War? Took about 30 years. So, modern day Germany, we'll begin with the fact that modern day Germany at the time did not exist. Modern day Germany at the time was made up of about 160 semi-independent city-states. At one point in time, there'll be 300 of them, some of them no bigger than Kenton, Boone, and Campbell counties put together, semi-independent. These states were independent of each other and yet weak and disunited. Germany was a pathway for merchants and trade routes, and with that greed over that trade and the subsequent taxes, in other words, there was a lot of money in Germany, a lot of profit. Germany, if you look at your map of Europe, is centrally located in Northern Europe, that if you want to get from Eastern Europe to Western Europe, you have to go through Germany. The population of Germany, though, was about equally divided between Protestants in the north and Catholics in the south. And that is something to keep in mind, that the Reformation had taken stronghold in northern Germany, but southern Germany was still loyal to the Roman Catholic Church. And once again, I may have told you this before, that the greater Cincinnati area, with people names like Arlinghaus, um, are German in their heritage. Not only that, they are probably from southern Germany. Uh, and I think that's A and B. Oh, yeah, and B, that a lot of them left Germany and migrated to this country during the latter part of the 19th century, fleeing basically in the 19th century. Otto von Bismarck uh, persecuted Roman Catholics, and many left. Okay, Lutherans were more successful at worshiping and existing in Catholic lands than Catholics were in Lutheran provinces. You say, what does that mean, Mr. Orton? It means that, to be honest, the Lutherans were pretty intolerant people. Yeah. Strife grew between liberal and conservative Lutherans, as well as between Lutherans and Calvinists. Calvinism gained a political edge when Frederick III, who was one of the rulers of one of the provinces of Germany, converted and became the Elector Palatine. Lutherans feared Calvinists almost as much as they did Catholics. I mean, see, this is one of the things about the Protestant Reformation, was particularly the Protestants. Once they gained autonomy, once they gained independence from the Catholic Church, once they got out from under them, they would turn right around and start persecuting other Protestants. Yeah, I mean, we're not talking about a religiously tolerant society. Yeah, in fact, the early years of this country, the United States of America, there was a lot of religious intolerance. For example, those friendly Puritans we talked about yesterday, if you weren't Puritan, you didn't want to wander amongst their midst. They would, for example, hang Quakers who happened to show up there. Connecticut, the state of Connecticut was started by William Hutchinson, because he was tired of dealing with Puritan intolerance. Anyway, off the subject. Sorry. So there were 4 periods of the 30 Years' War. Test, question, guaranteed, slam dunk. 4 periods of the 30 Years' War. And notice somebody nice wrote them there and put their dates on them. Now, no, you don't have to learn dates, but you might have to know what order they came in. The Bohemian, please tell me you remember that the word Bohemian means Czech, 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 Bohemian, Czech, Bohemian. The Danish period, the Swedish period, and then the Swedish-French period. About 30 years. Notice 1618, 1648. The Bohemian War began when Frederick III revoked freedom for Protestants. And because of the strife, some of his regents, his representatives, went to the city of Prague in what is now the Czech Republic. And they held a meeting between the delegation from Frederick III, the Catholics, and the Protestants there in Prague. And in the course of the meeting got so contested, so heated, that the Protestants grabbed physical hold of the Catholic representatives and threw them out of a 3rd-story window. Fortunately for them, and this is called the Defenestration of Prague. Fortunately for those people who got thrown out, they landed in a dung heap. Yeah, a large pile of animal excrement. And while embarrassing, it saved their lives. And so, I mean, both sides celebrated. Of course, the Protestants saying, haha, we threw those Catholics in the poop. And the Catholics saying, haha, it was a miracle of God that we did not die. But that little act started off the first phase of the 30 Years' War. This is the Bohemian phase. Notice it started in Prague. What began as a revolt against an unpopular king escalated into an international war. Spain sent troops to aid the Holy Roman Emperor Ferdinand. Ferdinand's army under General Tilly routed Frederick's soldiers at the Battle of White Mountain in 1620. Do you have to remember this? It's really minutia, to be honest. The war then spread into, look at this word, Bavaria. Now, if I'm in Europe, where do I find Bavaria? For most of us, you say the word Bavarian, you think of Bavarian cream, but people like Mr. Arlinghouse knows, being a German, that Bavaria is the southern reaches of Germany. Bavaria is the state of which the city of Munich is the capital. Bavaria, when you look at, in German, it's called Bayern. Yeah, Bavaria. If you ever go to Germany, most people, when they go to Germany, go to Bavaria. Why? Because that part of Germany, southern Germany, Munich, the Munich area, was just out of range of most of the bombings of World War II. And unlike the rest of northern Germany that got turned into a parking lot, and I mean fire bombs, they bombed, well, it actually created fire tornadoes, the bombings did. But Munich still looks fairly pristine. So yeah, the war then spread from what is now the Czech Republic into what is now southern Germany. All right, that's the first phase. Denmark's King Christian IV, with encouragement from England, with encouragement from Elizabeth I, because she wanted to poke a hole in the power of Spain, and also encouragement from France. Notice that France is a Catholic country, and yet they're encouraging Protestants against other Catholics. Put a pin in that, okay, that fact. And so Christian IV received encouragement from England, from France, and also from the Netherlands, pushed the war into northern Germany. Ferdinand was so successful that he felt he could issue the Edict of Restitution in 1629, with which he could reaffirm the Catholic guarantees noted in the Peace of Augsburg. In other words, this guy, Ferdinand, the Holy Roman Emperor, thought that, they had done so well that they could now take property that had been taken away from them. The new edict, however, polarized. I like big words, and I cannot lie. Polarize means to make people extremely disagree. In the last few years, there have been a lot of issues that have made people in this country extremely disagree. You might say that they are polarized. Galvanized is another word, very similar. It means that they harden their position. They are not wanting to negotiate. And so that new edict from Ferdinand made people angry, and it made them less willing to accept any compromise. Galvanized opposition to the Habsburgs, the rulers of Spain and Austria, and united the Protestants together. Okay, that's the second phase. In the Swedish period, Gustavus Adolphus, another name. Gustavus Adolphus, remember, his father had turned Protestant so he could snatch up some nice properties, became the new leader of Protestantism. He won victory at Brighton Field in 1630. He brought in new and successful tactics of coordinating infantry and cavalry charges called the fire and charge tactics. Gustavus Adolphus, however, died in engagements with Wallenstein. Wallenstein was a Catholic general. Wallenstein, though, having outlived his usefulness, was then assassinated by other Catholics, which showed the fact that this war, and remember, this is supposed to be a religious war, is a war entirely without honor. Greed and political gain were the real forces at work in the 30 Years' War. I mean, yeah, Machiavelli's right. What makes the world go round? Is it religion? No. What makes the world go round is sex, money, and power. Yeah. Anyway, so the Peace of Prague, which ended the Swedish stage of the war, was not universally supported. Sweden, who continued to receive support from France, pressed on for war. Once again, see, there's France. France is a Catholic country supporting Protestants against other Catholics. The Swedish-French period of the war was by far the most destructive. Swedish, French, and Spanish soldiers looted Germany throughout the 15 years of this war. I mean, basically, you have these three armies in Germany surviving on what they could take from the inhabitants. Very destructive. By the time the peace talks began in 1644 in Westphalia, 1/3, that should be 1/3. How does that happen? 1/3 of the German population had died in this war. I don't know why it shows up like that. But yeah, by the time the peace talks began in Westphalia, 1/3 of the German population was dead. Yeah. The 30 Years' War had been called the worst catastrophe since the Black Death of the 14th century. Because once again, 1/3 of the German population died in this war. 1/3 of a country's population. And yeah, the population of Germany is a lot bigger now, and wars cost more lives now and things of that nature. But I think of it this way. You know, in World War II, for example, a lot of people died when somebody else flipped a lever in an airplane and bombs got dropped. In the 30 Years' War, most of the deaths occurred to people who saw the person that killed them face to face. And the people that killed them looked in their face of the victims. Anyway, so finally, the Treaty of Westphalia brought the 30 Years' War to an end. Now, wars, speaking strictly from a perspective of AP Euro, are not important. What is important are results of wars and the peace that follows. So let's see what the Peace of Westphalia did. It reaffirmed the premise that each region of Germany's rulers would determine their own religion. In other words, it resustained the Peace of Augsburg. Each prince will decide what religion. The treaty also gave Calvinists their recognitions. I've seen this on a test somewhere, I swear. The Swiss Confederacy was recognized. That means, yeah, the country of Switzerland was created. The United Provinces of Holland, the Netherlands, was recognized, created. France and Sweden continued to meddle in German affairs. And France and Spain still remained at war. Although, interestingly enough, France and Spain are eventually going to become buddies. France became Europe's most dominant land power, and Habsburg power declined. This treaty perpetuated German weakness and disunity into the modern era. Yeah. Germany, once again, will remain a patchwork quilt of small states until the 19th century. All right. Any question? Now that finishes this unit. We will have this test on Reformation Wars on Wednesday, September the 30th. Okay? And I will see you then.